The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. John.
Glory be to you, O Lord.
Because next week is a solemnity of the Assumption of Mary, I'm including the next part of the Bread of Life text today. So we're reading from John 6:41 to 60. The Jews were complaining to each other about Jesus because he had said, "I am the bread that comes down from heaven." "Surely this is Jesus, son of Joseph," they said. "We know his father and mother. How can he now say, 'I have come down from heaven'?" And Jesus said in reply, "Stop complaining to each other. No one can come to me unless he is drawn by the Father who sent me. And I will raise him up on the last day. It is written in the prophets, they will all be taught by God. And to hear the teaching of the Father and learn from it is to come to me. No one, not that anyone has seen the Father except the one who comes from God. He has seen the Father. I tell you most solemnly, everyone who believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate manna in the desert, and they are dead. But this is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that a man may eat it and not die. I am the living bread, which has come down from heaven. Anyone who eats this bread will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh for the life of the world." Then the Jews started arguing with one another. "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" they said. And Jesus replied, "I tell you most solemnly, if you do not eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you will not have life in you. Anyone who does not eat my flesh and drink my blood, anyone who does eat my flesh and drink my blood has eternal life, and I shall raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood lives in me, and I live in him. As I, who am sent by the living Father, myself draw life from the Father, so whoever eats me will draw life from me. This is the bread come down from heaven, not like the bread our ancestors ate. They are dead. But anyone who eats this bread will live forever." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So we're deep into the Bread of Life discourse. Remember 3 weeks ago, we had the feeding of the 5,000. And we saw that Jesus has the power to take a few loaves and some fish, feed 5,000 and have 12 baskets left over. So the question is not about his power. He walked across the ocean and he revealed to the disciples who he was, having power over the waves, over water, over the elements. He even had Peter walk on water for a little bit. He reached Capernaum and they were looking for him, and he says, "You're looking for me not because you saw this sign. In other words, not because you believe that I am the one come down from God. You're looking for me because you had your belly full." And there Jesus began moving the text, so that we start to ask the questions now about what is Jesus really teaching us in this magnificent chapter 6 of St. John's Gospel. And remember, I'd really like you to pick up your Bible and read chapter 6, meditate on it, mull over it, look at it from all the different ways you can, so that we together will grow in an understanding of what Jesus is teaching us. In verse 61, which we'll meet 2 weeks from now, he says, "And this doctrine he gave in Capernaum in the synagogue." So actually, this is a homily that Jesus is giving. The whole of the Bread of Life discourse It's a homily that he gave because he gave it as a doctrine. He gave it in Capernaum. He gave it in the synagogue. And we could construct the days, and if it was a doctrine, and if it was in the synagogue, it's on the Sabbath, which probably means the feeding of the 5,000 would be on the Thursday, which prefigures the Holy Thursday event when he will do the Eucharist for the first time. And when they came looking for him would have been the Friday. And now this is the doctrine that is being given. What is Jesus saying? Twice in our text they are complaining. And our text opens, the Jews were complaining to each other about Jesus. Now, we should already hear the first set of Jews who were complaining. Those that were complaining against Moses in the desert because they had to eat this manna for over and over and over. That God provided for his people the food that they needed for their journey. And the people were complaining about how tasteless and how ordinary the food that God had provided was. I want you to hear it, What Jesus is invoking is the complaints of the people of Israel in the desert. That's what he's invoking and provoking. Why? Because, you see, they're not going to like this manna either. They didn't like that manna, and the bread that he is giving, they're not going to like that either. How often have we said that this food is unsatisfying food? Just like the people in the desert, they receive manna to help them to make their journey to the promised land. The people of Jesus' time, he was teaching them the bread of life, that he is the bread of life. They must eat his body, drink his blood. And they would have nothing with it. And today, when we are living with the gift of the Eucharist that has been given to us, which we cannot participate in a real sense at this time, when we are in this time where we have been hungering for Eucharist because months now we've not been able to enter into a church, we have to ask ourselves, how often have we seen the Eucharist the way that the ancestors saw it? The way that people in Jesus' time saw it, and the way that the people in the desert saw it. And as an interlude, we have another way of receiving the bread. And that's our first reading from the prophet Elijah, who he had just done this incredible feat of putting to rest all of the prophets of Baal, hundreds of them. He told them, you call to your God to bring fire down on your offering, and I'll do the same. And when no fire came on theirs, fire came on his, and he defeated all the prophets of the false gods. And he escapes because he knows the queen is going to kill him. And he's in the desert and he's dejected, and he can't see how he'll finish his journey, and he's feeling all kinds of odd feelings, and he's saying, Lord, it's better I die right here in the desert. And God sends an angel with some bread and some water for him, and says to him, take and eat. Take and eat. You see, brothers and sisters, when we feel dejected, when we feel out of sorts, when we feel we don't have what it takes to make this journey that God has put before our eyes and our hearts, then we understand why he gives us this Eucharistic bread, which is real food. This Eucharistic wine, which is blood, which is real drink. The body and blood of Jesus Christ is given to us that we can make our journey towards him. And in understanding the significance of the Eucharist, he phrases it with the complaining. And why are they complaining? Because surely we know this one. This is Jesus. This is we know his mother. We know him. We know all about him. How he could be claiming to come down from heaven. And that's a real drama. That's a real drama. In other words, we change your diapers, You can't tell us nothing about nothing now because we don't know who you are. Well, that might be true, but that don't mean you know who he is. And what is happening here is this barrier of the incarnation is stopping their mind from seeing the truth that is being set out before them. So when he pushes past them, he says, I have come down from heaven. Stop complaining. No one can come to me unless he is drawn by the Father who sent me. And I will raise them up on the last day. You know, many people have taken this to be predestination, and it is not. Because the next quote that he gives is so important. It is written in the prophets, they will all be taught by God. And to hear the teaching of the Father and learn from it is to come to me. So it is to be able to hear the teaching and learn. So the ones that God gives the grace to come to Jesus are the ones who are willing to hear the teaching and learn from it. You know, in the world of science, in this age in which we live, the maxim is, you know, if you see it, if I see it, then I'll believe it. If I see it, then I'll believe it. What Jesus is saying here is if you believe it, then you will see it. And that's a different way of understanding. You see, brothers and sisters, there's some things which you will never see unless you're willing to believe. But then we go to St. Anselm, who says, Lord, I have little faith. Help my little faith. I want to believe. Help my little faith. It is the beginning to desire to believe that opens the mind and the heart towards this disposition towards God. Because if the mind and heart is not disposed towards God, and that's what he's saying here, then nothing that anybody says to you at all is ever going to make you believe. Nobody could convince you if you do not want to be convinced. It's really as simple as that. But he's invoking a quote here from Isaiah 58 or Jeremiah 31. They will all be taught by God. Where Jeremiah prophesies that the time will come in when the Lord will write the law on the hearts of people. And no one will go to neighbor to ask, teach me how to know God. But they will all know God. And they will all be taught by God. And this prophecy is being fulfilled because once you understand that Jesus is who he claims to be, God, then they're all being taught by God. And since they're all being taught by God, the new covenant that Jeremiah has prophesied is coming into being. And because it is coming into being, they're the hearers and the first recipients of the new covenant. The new covenant will be enacted on the night before he dies. When he takes bread, when he takes wine, he says the blessing, he breaks, he blesses, he gives. And when he blesses the chalice, he says, this is the cup of the new and eternal covenant. In other words, what Jeremiah has prophesied, they will all be taught by God. What Isaiah has prophesied, they will all be taught by God. Has come into being by Jesus, who is God, who is teaching them, and they're still refusing to believe the teaching that God has given. You have to want to believe before you can really receive. And if you're struggling with this doctrine on the Eucharist, what I would say to you is, say to God, I want to believe. Help my unbelief. Lord, I want to believe. I really, really want to believe. Help my unbelief. The first part of the text is really speaking about Jesus as the bread of life, who you must believe in his teaching. You must believe in his teaching. Because he goes on and says, it is not me. To hear the teaching of the Father and learn from it is to come to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father except the one who comes down from God. He has seen the Father. I tell you solemnly, everyone who believes has eternal life. Now this is some big claims, you know. A first century Jew would have heard blasphemy here. That's what they would have heard. They would have heard first that he's claiming to have come down from God. In other words, he's claiming to be God. And second, he's claiming to give eternal life. Life to the ages is a technical term. And in these big claims, he's claiming divinity. is what he's claiming. And we can't come to the second part of the doctrine unless we come to the first part of it. Who do you believe Jesus Christ is? And that's what we struggled with last week when we did that teaching on the bread of life. Who is Jesus Christ? But here's the next piece that is so beautiful. Huh? He says, I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate manna in the desert. They are dead. But this is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that a man may eat it and not die. I am the living bread which comes down from heaven. Anyone who eats this bread will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh for the life of the world. He now takes it to another place. But I want to talk about this life that he's promising, this eternal life. What is this eternal life? You see, when Moses left Egypt with the people, God said that they will cross the desert over to the promised land. When Jesus leads us, he says we will cross through this veil of tears to eternal life with him, with the Father, and with the Holy Spirit. That's his promise to us. When Adam and Eve sinned, Genesis 3, what they did was they reached to the tree of knowledge and they took its fruit. And they ate from the tree of knowledge and their eyes were open. And what they did was they saw their own nakedness. They looked at themselves and they saw their nakedness. They became self-conscious. In Luke 24, in the walk of Emmaus, the two disciples, and we believe too it was a married couple, that their eyes were open. And again, once more, they saw the Lord. In the breaking of the bread, their eyes are open, they saw the Lord. In Genesis, when they reached for the tree of knowledge and they ate, God banished them from the Garden of Eden, lest they reach for the tree of life. And God said, let us banish them from the garden, lest they reach to the tree of life and eat from it. And then they will live forever. And they will live forever. What Jesus is saying is that the fruits of the tree of life is what I am giving you. That is my body. That is my flesh. What was promised by the eating of the tree of life, you will receive whenever you eat of me, whenever you eat of my flesh. And Jesus is making a very wild and bold and incredible claim here. That the bread that you will eat is better than the bread that your ancestors ate, they are dead. It is even better than the bread that Elijah ate. This bread is a bread that will take you from whatever despondency you have here in this life and take you to eternal life where you will experience God. And we know John 17 says an eternal life is this: to know the true God and Jesus Christ whom he sent. And that word to know is a word of intimacy. Adam knew Eve and she conceived a son. That's the word for nuptial union. That's the word for an intimate experience and coming towards and coming into who God is. So the experience that he's inviting us to is a knowledge of God, not like Adam and Eve had where they looked at themselves, but it is a knowledge of God that will bring us to intimacy again, which is what Adam and Eve had in the garden before the fall when they walked without shame before their God. But this knowledge of God will lead to eternal life. And this life is a life that no one can take from you. As we hear the text, when he says, anyone who eats this bread will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh for the life of the world. And that really riles up. It riles up the Jews. Why? Because how can you give us your flesh to eat? So the next text is, and then the Jews started arguing with one another, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? How can he give us his flesh to eat? All the time, the word to eat in the earlier part of the text is a word, phogein, which is kind of, could be taken metaphorical or literal. It could be taken each way, and either way. It really doesn't matter. You could argue about which way it goes. But here Jesus changes the word to eat. He changes to trogeo. And trogeo, which means literally tearing flesh with your teeth. Literally chewing, gnawing on. It's a very literal, graphic word that can't be taken in any other way but in its most radical, literal sense of breaking flesh with your teeth. And he's saying here, I tell you solemnly, if you do not eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you will not have life in you. Anyone who does eat my flesh and drink my blood has eternal life. And this is struggle. This is literally tearing flesh with your teeth. And what we have here now is a scandal of all scandals. Is he talking about cannibalism here? And they cannot understand. But we too are struggling with this. And let us struggle with it. Let us struggle with it by asking the Holy Spirit to come to us and help us to understand this doctrine that Jesus taught. Because the doctrine has a high price. Many of the Jews who were with him walked away from him. It has a high price. Why does he not just say, no, I'm only talking metaphorically, don't take me so literally? He doesn't do that. The doctrine has a high price. Let's go again. When it says, I tell you most solemnly, if you do not eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you will not have life in you. Anyone who does eat my flesh and drink my blood has eternal life, and I shall raise him up on the last day. He's talking about real eating. And if you miss the point, he goes on, for my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood lives in me, and I live in him. Brothers and sisters, you know, this is an incredible doctrine. A first century Jew listening to the text would immediately have thought of Leviticus 17 or Deuteronomy 9, where there's a prohibition against the drinking of the blood of animals, because in the world of idolatry they believed that the animal was like a deity, and the nations around Israel believed that to drink the blood of the animal is to commune with the deity and to draw life from the deity. And so they had a prohibition against drinking the blood of animals. And it was a very strong prohibition. You couldn't just walk away from it. Jesus is breaking the law by telling them, you must drink my blood. And more than breaking the law, what he's doing is he's using this whole understanding of drinking the blood of the animals as a communion with the deity, and saying, this is what I am doing because I am God, and when you drink my blood, you commune with God. Because he goes on to say, anyone who does eat my flesh and drink my blood has eternal life, and I shall raise him up on the last day. My flesh is real food, my blood real drink. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood lives in me, and I live in him. There is this communion that John 17 talked about, and eternal life is this, to know the one true God and Jesus Christ whom he sent. This intercommunion between God and us as human beings, that's what he's talking about here in this text. You know, St. Teresa said when she first had communion, when she first had communion, she said what she experienced was a fusion between her and God. A fusion between her and God. That she became part of God and God became part of her in a most mystical and amazing way. St. Ignatius of Antioch says that the Eucharist is the one medicine that we have that will take us to immortality and to eternal life. The one medicine here on earth that will cure the worst ailment, the ailment of original sin and the ailment of death that has been imposed upon us because of sin. And the one cure for that is the Eucharist. And those who believe that he's talking metaphorically about his word, the text is actually divided in two parts. The first part is about the word and belief in Jesus. The second part is talking about the Eucharist and eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And he does not give us options out. And he says, if you eat of me, you will draw life from me. You drink of me, you will draw life from me. Brothers and sisters, the text is as beautiful and as clear as we can have it. Anyone who eats this bread will live forever. What do you believe about the Eucharist? And I'm asking you today to look and see. Be honest with God about what you believe. And if you can't quite see, then say to him, Lord, I want to believe. Help my unbelief. I want to believe. Because the Eucharist is the most incredible gift God has ever given to us. And that gift is what he's given us this doctrine on when he was in Capernaum in the synagogue. Amen.